We are fortunate this year to have had two GOH experiences to share with the firm. The first we had Deidre's, which was actually the year before, but her presentation was moved into the spring this year due to our move, where she shared her experiences in Switzerland and Spain, and explored the idea of biophilia and how it affects what we do every day. In a few moments, we'll have our 2016 winner, Emily Marshall, and she'll share her experiences through Morocco and Portugal. Emily is the fourth recipient of this award, created in honor and legacy of one of our firm's founding partners, Greg Niedak, who is in the audience today with his wife, Judy. Glad to have him. And we also have Barry and his lovely wife, Sweet Barb, to join us today. And for those of you who are new to the firm, I'd like to give you a kind of a quick synopsis of this national award-winning program we started here in our firm. The GOH Travel Scholarship is a competitive award that offers HBG Design employees the opportunity to travel anywhere in the world, to experience other cultures, discover new ideas, and research a topic or topics that you are passionate about. Emily's presentation tonight marks both the culmination of the past year's award program and the start of a new program year. With that in mind, here are a few reminders about our timeline for the 2017 process. First of all, we're extending the deadline to submit your intent to Friday, September 8th. If you plan to submit for this year's award, we ask that you let Tamara Goff know by that date. That's Friday, September 8th. Next, for those of you who are eligible to apply this year, we have invited you to our annual Demystifying the GOH Travel application process, which is scheduled to take place, and I saw today that might have been moved. Is that correct or not? Maybe not. Tuesday, September 5th, right after Labor Day holiday. We'll confirm that date, I guess. If you're interested in applying for that scholarship, this is a must-attend event. Terry and Tamara will share insights into what the jury is looking for in your application, and it's a great time to ask questions and just learn more about the program. If you have not yet RSVP'd for this Lunch and Learn, make sure you do that. And if you need more information, please go to see Tamara as soon as possible. Lunch will be provided at that event. As a final reminder, the actual submission deadline for the GOH Travel Program is Saturday, September 30th at midnight. Following tonight's presentation, we will be changing out the exhibit on the wall in the hallway up above. Please go by and see large prints of all of her travel experiences. I think that kind of covers it all. Okay. I'd like to invite Emily up to the stage to share her immersive experience in Morocco and Portugal. In her application, Emily expressed her idea of travel as an experience that could unlock inspiration. So tonight we're excited to hear all about it. Emily.
Well, welcome. That light is really bright. Thank you. I just wanted to say some thank yous first. Thank you to HBG for providing me this wonderful opportunity, to your employees. And thank you to Greg Niedak for passing along a contagious passion for travel and leaving us with an inspiring legacy. Thank you to Robert for being a great travel companion and the calm that I needed when our flights were canceled and when I forgot to print our Ryanair tickets. It did not work out well. And thanks to our families for taking care of our lives and Sammy Joe while we were away. I'm going to try not to be too boring, so don't fall asleep. I set the intention of this trip to find creative inspiration, specifically through immersion in 2 different countries whose cultures and traditions affect their visual connection with the world. Morocco has drawn artists and creative personalities to its doors for centuries, and Portugal is experiencing a transition into a new era with an influx of money and creative energies in its cities. I chose to start with a hike through the Atlas Mountains to unplug myself from my day-to-day energy and expose myself to a different way of living without technology and distraction. My first stop was a 3-day hike through the Berber villages of the High Atlas Mountains, the heart of Morocco and the source of my sensory experience in Morocco. The High Atlas Range in the northern tip of Africa creates a historical and physical barrier between the northern plains of Morocco and the pre-Saharan desert region, and is home to some of Morocco's most remote villages. These mountains house over 45 different Berber tribes, the historic people of Morocco, with some areas just experiencing running water and electricity this decade. This is a map of the different tribes, 45 different tribes in Morocco, this being the High Atlas, the Mid Atlas, and then more of the Saharan desert here. So it's a little bit confusing. The Middle Atlas is actually the highest and the coldest, and I'll explain that in its connection to the rugs that I have here later, and the High Atlas is kind of the mid-level, and the Saharan desert, obviously, the desert. The local Berbers that populate these villages measure distances by hours and days, the amount of time it usually takes to travel between destinations. My goal for my time in the High Atlas is to immerse myself in the environment for 3 days, to hike from village to village and experience this culture from Morocco from the source. The Berber people have been around for over 4,000 years. At one time, fighting the Romans, Arabs, and French invaders, they've been called many names: Libyans by ancient Greeks, Africans by the Romans, and Moors by the medieval Europeans. These are some photos of the Berber villages that we traveled through, and then some stock imagery of the children that I found online. The guide that I'll talk about in a moment recommended that we not take photos of any of the villagers' faces. So a lot of these people that I found are online. We started out from Marrakesh, which is right here, on a 2-hour drive, and arrived at the foothills of the Western High Atlas in a town called Emily. It was really called Emily. At 4,500 feet, I did not know that before I went. It was at 4,500 feet, and it was the base for many treks through the High Atlas. The town is filled with guides, muleteers, donkeys, and hikers like myself preparing for their trek for the mountains. A common trek was something that we did, which is a 3-day hike through the villages, and then the other most popular trek was to this peak right here, the Tube Col, which is the highest point in northern Africa. So that was a little bit too advanced for me and would take more days, so I chose the 3-day hike. We met our guide, Mustafa. We did not talk about the Lion King, at a local cafe and reviewed our 3-day hike over mint tea. Mint tea is also known as Berber whiskey, as Morocco is an Islam country and there's no alcohol allowed. We would hike up 3 main mountains and down into 3 valleys for about 8 hours a day, staying in guest houses at night. Mustafa assured us that this was an easy task. The website assured us that this was an easy hike, and it was, I would say it was moderate. I mean, it was kind of hard. I mean, I did Yosemite last year, and it was a little harder than that. So, for whatever that's worth. We set off on switchback mule tracks with the highest peak Tube Col and always in our view. We passed fields of peas and poppies, which apparently grow together, mountain oregano and wildflowers, and began to see the beginnings of an irrigation canal that would feed all the farmland we would hike through. The first village we hiked through was full of pale pink mud brick houses with thatched roofs, chickens, goats, and sheep. Mustafa told us that every village has 3 things: a mosque, an elementary school, and a cemetery. Most of the villagers farm land throughout the valley, growing a variety of crops that they sell to other villages in larger cities. And then this house number right here is connected to the irrigation canals, so I'll show a photo about that later on, but every irrigation canal has a certain segment that's devoted to each family. And the way that they water the crops from the irrigation canal above their crops is by putting this like metal panel down through the irrigation canal, and each metal panel has a number that's associated with their house. So that's why that's important. This is a mosque for anyone that's never seen one.
Because tomorrow the imam, when he comes to the mosque, he will ask.
As we hiked through the village, we continued to travel up in elevation. We passed a room in the village mosque where children were practicing the Quran. You could hear them singing the same thing over and over again, and the teacher urging them along. You can hear our voices a little bit in this video, but I tried to get a little bit of them singing. As we began to crest to the top of the mountain and climb out of the tree line, I mirrored Mustafa's rhythmic pace. Each step that he took was very slow and very even, always the same length. He hummed as we walked, a low tune, the only sound I could hear besides my footsteps and the wind through the trees. I could feel myself disconnecting and feeling lighter and not caring about the Cache Creek deadline that had just left. Sorry, Jonathan. We made our way to the top of the pass and stopped for lunch in an open-air building. It's Morocco's version of a convenience store, and it was at about 7,500 feet. There were 2 rooms, a kitchen where Mustafa and our cook Aldine made us lunch, and the second where a local villager sold convenience items. His inventory included a few bottles of water and some fruit. Our lunch was a freshly cut vegetable platter with sardines and bread. We received minimal utensils and were encouraged to eat with our hands. Similar to other Arab and African countries, it's customary to use your right hand to eat and shake hands with, and your left hand for less sanitary uses. After lunch and a bathroom break, and I did prepare, so I knew it was happening, just in case anybody was afraid to shake my left hand, I was ready. After lunch and a bathroom break, we began our trek into the first valley with a view of our future path along the way. So throughout our hike, we were able to kind of see these great vantage points. I have another one on the other side of this, but I'm basically standing there looking over here. So it just is incredible to think about how far you can go in just a few hours. We made our way deeper into the valley and we're surrounded by the fresh smell of mint. So I don't know if you guys checked out the experience table, but there's a lot of mint over there, some mint tea that I'll talk about later. I don't know if anybody's also ever grown mint in their garden, but if you have, you know you have to keep it contained. You have to put it in a pot because it will take over like wildflower. I got some mint from Alex Campbell actually 3 years ago, and it is like crazy. So it was actually a really refreshing smell, and the taste in my mouth was a nice respite from the dry and dusty breath that I'd had when I was hiking. We crossed through the villages and caught glimpses of a rug or a door that popped in color amongst the brown and gray backdrop. Every village looked basically like this. A lot of mud brick and stone. This was a common door or window. This is actually a door that somebody walked through and a window for air. Everything was brown and gray, and then a couple doors were open and you would look in through those and see these bright pops of color and rugs, and every door, I'll talk about that in a minute, was different. So we crossed through the valley and could see our lunch spot from where we were at. We passed mules and sheep herders on the trail and continued on. This is actually one of the other muleteers, so we didn't have a lot of traffic on the trails with us, but every once in a while we'd see another group, and this was what we had in our group to carry our food. So we have everything that we were going to sleep in or kind of change into on our backs. And another interesting thing is the villagers also used mules, and they had their own rugs. So every village had a specific rug that was associated with it, and the mules that they used had these rugs as kind of saddlebacks. So I talked about irrigation canals earlier. This is kind of a photo of a few, and when I was speaking about the metal panels, this is what I was talking about here. So you can see in this area, each metal panel had a number associated that was associated with the house. So when it was your time to feed whatever crop you were growing below the irrigation canal, you would just move this metal panel over and all the water would be diverted to the fields below. And so actually on our last day, when we were hiking back to Emily, we took a path that was along an irrigation canal, and we didn't know that the irrigation canal above it was going to flood all the fields below. So basically we had to take our shoes off and walk through the water because there was like no way to get through. We passed mules and taking supplies from village to village. We heard donkeys braying in the distance and saw newly woven rugs laying in the sun. We arrived at the guest house we would stay in that night, called a gîte, French for guest house, in one of the highest settlements in the Atlas at about 7,600 feet. We unpacked for the evening and enjoyed a snack of popcorn, sugar wafers, and Moroccan mint tea. I hope you all got an opportunity to try some of the tea, also known as Berber whiskey. We relaxed on the balcony while Mustafa and Aldine prepared our dinner of curried lentil soup and vegetables and watched the happenings of the village across the river. A group of local women, you can see them right here barely, were fully covered in long robes and headscarves, and they kind of hiked all the way across the mountain to their village. You could just see, a massive brown mountain and these little tiny dots of color always moving. And I was thinking about like what I had hiked that day and how this is probably so easy for them. It's all in context. A village herded a sheep and a mule on the mountainside. At sunset, the call to prayer echoed through the valley, each mosque song mixing with the next, and the sound traveled down the river basin. Our bedroom for the evening was a room with 3 beds and some questionable stains. And it was in this moment that I was very happy that I had brought a sleeping bag along. And I thank you for that, Robert. It was a good call. And that does look like the Cookie Monster. Did not plan for that. The next 2 days were similar to the first. We hiked up to 8,000 feet at one point and then back down to a village in the river valley. We passed through many villages along our trek, picking from cherries above us, sharing the trail with local sheep herders and children heading to school. This is a cherry tree. They were in season while we were hiking, and there were cherries all over the trail, and we would just walk by, pick a few, and eat them. It's a great snack. This was one of the schools we passed, and funny story. We were hiking back up to our guest house one night, and some children were hiking down. They had just left school, and they just stopped and stared at us and laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed. And I asked Mustafa, what? I mean, I know we probably look funny, but what's going on? He's like, they just really like your hats. So I don't know what that was about. Each village we passed through had the same mud brick houses, every one highlighting an individual door style. Some were painted metal, some wood, so many different colors. This and the rugs covering the mud clay floors were also unique to each home. We learned that each of the over 45 different Berber tribes had a specific design style for their rugs, a calling card that others used to recognize their origins. While one weaving from the High Atlas village looked similar to the next, the subtleties were recognizable to the villagers themselves. From colors of yarn to the sizing of specific elements, these instructions were handed down from generation to generation. The pile height and weave had a logical explanation behind it. The looser, shaggier rugs were from higher up in the mountains to protect from the cold, and the flatter, more tightly woven rugs were from the lower climates, the desert, and some used them as shawls. So this is a general explanation. It's got a lot more going on to it, but of a Saharan rug here, which is an example right here in front of you, if you want to check it out after this. This is from the High Atlas, which again is kind of the middle in elevation, and this is an example of that as well. So you can see a mix of kind of a shaggier pile height and a flat weave. And then this from the middle Atlas, the highest in elevation and the coldest of climates. And I have an example right here. And if anybody's following, of course you are because you're all designers or architects, current design trends, then you know that this is actually a really popular rug style right now. So throughout our entire time in Morocco, I was really surprised at how many things come from a culture like this. I have a little bag down here that has some tassels on it. I'm sure you've seen all those earrings and bags and bathing suits that have all the tassels. We saw that everywhere in the souks that we were in Marrakesh. And then the whole tribal look is it's just really interesting to see where all this stuff comes from and where these fashion designers and interior designers and architects get inspiration. As we hiked, we always had a great vantage point of where we'd come from. So this is a couple of vantage points. So I was here when I took the photo, and we had come from that pass right there in a day. Same day, we had hiked all the way down here. This is actually the worst part. It doesn't look that bad, but it was all like this loose, salty rock. And every time you walked down, your foot would slip. So that was totally the worst for me. I can hike up all day long. Down is a different story. So miles and miles completed in hours, and photo of the cherries. This is what I looked at for 3 days, basically, which is the ground. And then this is me. This is Mustafa. This is Aldine, the man that cooked for us, and this is the mule that he carried his supplies on. Our last evening in the village, closest to Emily, which was our base, we stayed in a brand new guest house. Open air, 3 stories. The family lived on the first floor. We sat on the balcony for hours watching the comings and goings of the town. Children leaping down a steep incline to the valley floor, something that would have taken me 3 times as long. Donkeys braying to each other in the distance. Old men walking to the outlook point of the town and sitting and watching. The day that we actually left, this is the guest house. This is actually where we were at. This is one of the ceilings. On the first floor, we were walking out, and this was a very wealthy family in the village. They didn't, it was all open air. They didn't have any air conditioning, but they did have a washing machine that they would push outside every day, apparently, and wash for a lot of people in the village. So they would push it outside, plug it up to the only outlet that they had kind of in that area, and just wash outside. So that night, we heard the call to prayer while we were sitting on the balcony, and this is something we heard every night while we were in the Atlas Mountains and in Marrakesh, Tangier, and Chefchaouen. But in the mountains, it was actually so ethereal because each mosque has someone that sings this live, every night, and the sound would travel through the valley, and you would hear them kind of mixing with each other. And then, every town we were in, no matter if it was in the mountains or in the cities, everything just got quiet right around dusk when this happened. So if you listen for a moment, you'll start to hear them mixing together and the birds above. All their different styles of singing. I was really excited to explore Marrakesh and Tangier and Chefchaouen after this and see how the Berber tradition and culture had, affected these cities, modern-day societies. So we left the mountains and followed the traders' traditional path to the marketplaces and the souks of Marrakesh. Paul Bowles described the Medinas of Morocco as a maze of sunless, twisting streets filled with blind alleys, and the smell a mix of hashish, seared meat, and sewage. This is a true statement. Medina is loosely translated into Old City, which in many Moroccan cities, the Medina is defined by the walls surrounding the Old City. In Marrakesh, the Medina walls define the newer developments on the outside. So this is a map view of the Old City, and then this is a view of all the different tiny, tiny buildings that are inside the Medina walls. From the moment we left our taxi after we arrived in Marrakesh, frenetic energy was all around us. Motorbikes speeding by, donkey carts and bikers swerving past, vendors yelling for attention. A small man with a cart greeted us at the entry to the Medina. We exchanged broken French, gave him our bags, and followed him through the winding alleys of the Medina to our riad. We turned down an alleyway and arrived at a large, unassuming door. As we walked through the entry, I was instantly met with contrasting silence. This is by design. There are no windows to the outside world in a riad, only a courtyard that opens up to the sky and very thick walls. Riads take their names from the Arabic word garden, and most all have a central water feature and surrounding trees with 2 or more levels around a courtyard. So this is a plan that I found, but is a general idea of kind of where we were staying. This being the outdoor courtyard below on level 1, this being level 2, having a terrace all around and having chambers and open air seating areas. They are traditionally only found in Medinas with a dedicated footprint and no room for growth, requiring an interest in building up. We met our host for this riad, a Belgian woman who had lived in Marrakesh for 15 years, and her entourage of riad cats. And we're shown to our room, right off the central courtyard, and we're immediately met with a cool draft of air. There was no air conditioning in this riad, but the room was cool and even 100-degree heat. Again, by design, the walls are up to 24 inches thick, which gave the rooms a cave-like atmosphere. The colors and textures were all very subtle. Warm blush tones on the exterior, cool white on the interior, with traditional Moroccan rugs, the color of Morocco itself. The common rooms of the riad contained a cornucopia of antique Berber crafts, elegant rooms with sunken seating areas, fireplaces, painted wood beam ceilings, embellished metal lanterns, bronze burnished fittings, and spacious rooms clothed in pale sunset pink and cream. The color palette was restful and calm and evoked that sense on us while we were there. We dropped our bags and headed back out onto the Medina to get our first taste of Marrakesh. Our riad was in a residential area within the walls, just a short 5-minute walk from the souks. Souks are marketplaces within a Medina, so it's typical to find them a theme. Carpet, food, woodworking, metal. Each storefront is tiny, 6 feet wide by 12 feet deep sometimes, with the goods spilling out onto the pathway. No cars are allowed in the Medina, and the common form of travel is by motorbike, bicycle, or donkey cart. Getting lost is very easy. Feels like an ancient world, twisting, winding paths with familiar buildings around every corner. Being confined within the walls of the city gave us a sense of safety. We couldn't get too far away from home, so we explored every winding path, turning around, backtracking, and sampling some of the local flavor. So I'm sure you guys have seen the tassels. This is what I was talking about, and this is what a souk kind of looks like. They always have a ceiling covering here to block the sun. It's very hot there. And then another thing that I found interesting, which I didn't connect at first, was that every morning and every afternoon they wash everything down because it's so dusty. So This is a lantern shop. Again, these were all kind of spaced together, so you would pass the lantern area. The spice area was called the Spicy Row. And then those patterns, this is a yarn store. This is a leather goods store, Cats, Kate. In the food souk, we passed fish stalls and poultry stalls where the birds are kept on site and slaughtered on demand. Fruit stalls, so many vendors selling cherries and mint, which I might have been tempted to purchase if it weren't for the freshly picked produce I had just experienced in the mountains. We became very good at jumping out of the way of speeding motorbikes and learned to follow the donkey carts through the Medina at crowded times. After picking up some deerings and getting lost a few times, we made our way back to the Riyadh for dinner. This is some other photos of the souk. So back to carpets. This is Sufjan. This is the rug that I bought. I purchased it via PayPal. I thought about it a lot. I think I visited it maybe 3 times while we were in Marrakesh. It was on the wall, so it was special, and he said it was vintage, and I was like, come on, Sufjan, I know what vintage is. But I just totally fell in love with it. And if you check it out down here, you'll see it's actually 2 rugs in one. So there's a very shaggy pile, which is the winter side. And then the other side is more flat. So it's the summer side. That's what we have up right now. And for anybody that's interested, I have Sufjan's information. And the rugs are very reasonably priced, and he can hook you up. And PayPal's commercials are right. It is protected by insurance. I actually purchased it when we were in Portugal. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then this is a photo of some guys whittling. They did a lot of wood whittling with their feet, which is interesting. And then the food market. You saw that guy. There are the birds. There are the dead birds. I'm not sure. I guess like fish don't eat ice there. I don't know. And there's a cat. This is actually a tangine. I'm going to talk about this in just a minute. So we head back to our Riyadh and had dinner. Most of our dinners consisted of antipasta course. This was shredded beets, carrots, and pickles, and then a vegetable tangine for me. Robert had goat, chicken, multiple different meats. A tangine is a traditional Moroccan stew that can include vegetables or a meat cooked in a clay pot. So this is an example of a tangine. The dome top is supposed to force the condensation back into the dish and keep the contents moist and tender, and it originated with the Berber people. I haven't mentioned the bread yet. Low carb is not an option in Morocco. It's an integral part of every meal. So every meal, from breakfast, lunch, to dinner, we were served like 3 to 5 different breads. My favorite was this kind of like fry bread, crepe fry bread. This is more of an eggy crepe. We had a lot of this here. And bread is kind of a carrier for food, so they use it like a pita. So you kind of scoop it up. Utensils are not very popular. So we spent a few more days in Marrakesh and visited some local favorites, the Casbah, El Badi Palace, and the enchanting Majorelle Gardens, each venue displaying an impressive display of tile work. And the most common found throughout Marrakesh and the country was the zeleg, a mosaic tile made from individually chiseled geometric tiles and one of the most recognizable features of Moroccan architecture. The framework for expression arose from the need of Islamic artists to create spatial disruption. Decoration that avoided depictions of living things. Script is also used in decoration, spelling a sacred name. And the art of zeleg making is transmitted from generation to generation from master craftsmen. We didn't actually see any of this in the Berber villages or any tile, but in the major cities in Morocco, this was very popular. The most beautiful and intact display of this tile work was at the Ben Yusuf Madrasa, which is an Islamic school that was originated from 1100 AD. The school had 130 dormitory rooms nestled around a major courtyard. This is the view of the courtyard. If you are on Instagram, you've seen this. Somebody's been gramming on this. This arabesque surrounded the wood doors, and 3-dimensional plaster work was paired with onyx columns. This is some of the plaster work. And this was one of the small dorm rooms that I was really drawn to. This actually wasn't in, this was right outside the Ben Madrasa, but my mom loves cranes, so I put it in for her. And also gold, it's great. Brass, it's actually brass. But I found myself really drawn to the small dorm rooms. They were so small, they were all throughout, and it's just kind of interesting to think about how much interest and inspiration and like learning is happening in that space, and it felt really, really powerful. Our last night in Marrakesh, we walked down to the night market in the Djemfana Square. I did not say that right. Home to a labyrinth of exotic souks, traditional artisans and jugglers, fortune tellers, street performers, snake charmers, and musicians with sounds from all over Africa. There were food stalls lined up throughout the market and a whole alley devoted to snails. Babouche is what they call it. The smell of cumin and saffron intermingled with the smell of cooked meat. Vendors yelled for our attention, trying to convince us that we were actually hungry. We walked throughout the market, and this is a clip of the sound of all the different musicians that were spread throughout there. So it was different groups that were kind of just playing with each other, and you could just walk up and play with them if you want. I think you can hear a transition right now. Totally different group of people. When I was in Morocco, sometimes I forgot that I was actually in Africa, but our last day in Marrakesh, we visited the Majorelle Gardens before boarding an overnight train to northern Morocco. Majorelle was owned by an impressionist painter, Jacques Majorelle, in the 1930s, and was purchased by the fashion designer Yves Saint Laurent in 1980 before it was turned into a hotel. Unassuming from the exterior, it sits just outside the old city walls of Marrakesh. Inside, a garden of a cacophony of pink bougainvillea, blush-colored water lilies, and cacti. The inner walls are painted vibrant cobalt shade, Majorelle blue, named after the gardener's namesake, paired with bright cobalt or accessories and trim painted in teals, bright yellows, corals, and blush pink. A mix of a Moroccan garden with the European spirit, the garden was cultivated out of a palm grove in 1923, and Jacques Majorelle's Art Deco studio, which is right there, is where Yves Saint Laurent sketched out all of his designs until his death. Our next stop was a quick trip to the northern Moroccan town of Chefchaouen via an overnight train and taxi. This is me on an overnight train. I tried hard to have that smile. Tucked high in the mountains, the Morocco's Rif Mountains, which is north of the High Atlas, the all-blue town of Chefchaouen is a calming respite from the overwhelming frenzy of Marrakesh. Called the Blue Pearl by some, its blue origins are based in an influx of Jewish settlers in the 1400s, escaping the Spanish Inquisition. They brought with them a tradition of painting walls blue that has remained present today, and the presence of blue was said to remind the people of God's power. We arrived in Chefchaouen while it was still early, and the bright sun was shining down, making the dividing line between the blue wall and the blue sky almost invisible. The air was cool, and shop owners were just starting to open for the day. Chaouen, as the locals call it, is on the side of a mountain, so hilly is an understatement, and just when I thought I had completed my hiking adventure, we dropped our bags off and began to wander. Shades from pale to bright, all mixed together. The Medina was a maze of miniature, secret alleys and doll-like doors painted in brown or blue, grommeted with brass. Every corner held a surprise of color and texture, and echoing laughter from children playing ball beyond. Perfectly groomed green plants set on doorsteps, contrasted against the ochre and blue and colorful laundry, was strewn across windows and side streets, adding to the rainbow. In every direction, the shadows of someone hunched over a cane, hooded in a woolen robe, or shop owners beginning their day was present. We made our way to the Ras El Ma, what the town residents referred to as the source. It was a tiny waterfall spurting out of the mountain. The El Ma served as a meeting point for locals, a picnic spot, and a place where people came to do their laundry among the tourists and wanderers. So there was a large area where there were many ladies doing their laundry. This is the goat friend that I met. This is actually the El Ma, and then this is one of the only photos I took of the children while I was in Morocco. Getting lost in Chef's Medina was enjoyable. Without the aggression of the vendors yelling for attention or dodging out of the way of speeding motorbikes, we drifted aimlessly, content to take in all the sights, stopping for tea or to take a photo of the many cats that crossed our path. I'm probably going to do a cat calendar at the end of this year. Just let me know if you want to be on my list. Spice shops dotted the sides of the streets, full of turmeric and Moroccan oils, incense and musk. Brightly colored henna dyes lined the side of one street, used to paint hands and feet during weddings. A man painting a wall far away, bees covering the inside of a pastry case. We climbed up to the top of the walls and found in a tiny little bunker this man making these traditional Islamic robes. And I paid him €1 or $2 to actually film this video. I have an example of a robe on the experience table. This is actually what they look like. So Chefchaouen was one of the only places in Morocco that we visited where they actually had hoods, which was interesting. And I haven't really actually understood where that comes from. As the day progressed, the streets filled with many more tourists. Some bussed in for the day. They filled the alleys, posing for photos in their sun hats and their Instagram poses. The residents didn't seem to mind. Older women moved slowly up and down the hill, and children played in the streets. Men sat and stared at the comings and goings. We headed back to the Riad to experience a hammam spa. I joked about hammams in my previous presentation. Maybe I was a little scared. Rightly so. The process involves someone basically bathing you. But its origins are based in cleansing yourself to aid in religious purification. And every village that we traveled through in the mountains had one. It's definitely something I'm glad I did, and it left me feeling energized and relaxed. And that is not me. Okay. Alcohol is not an easy thing to find in Morocco, and especially in the more conservative areas. We settled for mint tea and sweets as we sat in the main square and watched the town. And he was giving me side-eye. As dusk came, more people arrived at the square. Groups of teenagers had little spats in front of us. Mothers and young children sat at the perimeter chatting with each other. It was a Saturday night, so the whole town was out. Older men clothed in hooded robes smoked and drank tea at the local cafes. We made our way back to the Riad and were drawn to live music playing in a cafe we had passed earlier in the day. The main room was set up like a living room with a 5-piece band playing traditional music in front of a fireplace. We were offered mint tea and 2 orange kittens began playing at my feet, so I was good. Others came and left. A couple from France sat next to us and distracted the orange kittens for a moment, but then they came back to me. Robert actually had the opportunity to play with the band for a few numbers on the bongo drums. Everyone we met in Chaouen was open, kind, and treated us like friends. Throughout our visit in Morocco, we felt safe, and everyone was so open and kind to us. Our time in Chefchaouen was actually the most relaxed we had felt so far. Time really did seem to slow down while we were there. The next morning, we headed to our last visit in Morocco, which is the midpoint of my presentation, if anybody's timing it, the international city of Tangier. We only spent one night in Tangier, really more for travel purposes than anything, and that could be the one regret that I had from this trip. Other than not staying longer, Rob Lee would not allow me to stay longer. The city itself felt very different from Marrakesh and Chefchaouen. It was Moroccan, but it wasn't. The Medina was less frenzied than Marrakesh and seemed to be almost wholly utilized by locals. There were cafes and snack bars, not as many tourist shops. The spice shops were less about visual appeal and more focused on service and providing freshly ground herbs and spices. Wandering the food markets, we came across hooves, animal heads, pencil clams. This is a pencil clam. I'd never seen it before. Freshly ground herbs and spices, whereas in Marrakesh, we came upon a spice market and it was, all ground for you. In Tangier, the ginger was there, and you said, I would like, this much of ginger, and they would grind it right in front of you. We had one of our best meals of the entire trip in this city called the Soirée de Poisson. It was $20 per person, one option for everyone, and you got grape juice with it. All the fish was caught fresh that day, and the best breads of all the breads we tried. There were antique stores outside the Medina walls that we explored for an hour or so, treasures from all over Africa, stacks upon stacks of towels, lanterns, and ceramics. This is one of the many stacks in this antique store of tiles, just everywhere. It was also another reminder that I was in Africa, because there were lots of tribal artifacts from all over. Again, no ice for fish, I guess. I don't know. William S. Burroughs said Tangier is one of the few places left in the world. As long as you don't proceed to robbery, violence, or some form of crude antisocial behavior, you can do exactly what you want. From the 1920s to the 50s, Tangier was a free-wheeling international zone, governed barely by a consortium of mostly European powers, making it a lawless hub for spies, the wealthy, and eccentrics from every corner of the globe. Tangier attracted expatriates and travelers seeking illicit substances and activities in a palm-fringed seaside crossroads where Africa almost touches Europe. Beat writers wrote in a haze of drug and booze. Paul Bowles, the Rolling Stones, Tennessee Williams, Patti Smith, and Matisse all walked these streets, posted up in these cafes, or called Tangier home. Moroccan monarchy let the city decay, and by the 1970s, Tangier was a seedy has-been. Today, the city is undergoing a turnaround. Now prized by the king, who assumed the throne in 1999, Tangier is building a huge new luxury marina, a green seafront, and Africa's first high-speed train line. Monuments and museums are getting facelifts, and the streets of both the century's old Medina and the colonial-era neighborhoods are sprouting boutique hotels, design shops, and hot new restaurants. Walking the streets of the Medina, you can feel the energy of forces conflicting. Men in long robes walk past glue-sniffing kids. Old establishments like the old Morocco Club here and the old Casbah feel like stepping back into a spy novel in the 60s. A 5-minute walk down the hill from the El Morocco Club, you can sip a cocktail under patio lights and artfully graffitied walls with young Moroccans. A walk down the Medina provides opportunity to have tea at the historic Cafe Baba, where the Rolling Stones smoked hashish during one of their stays, or enjoy a pastry from a marble and chrome-clad eatery that looks straight out of New York. The host of our riad was a self-described Tangier person, something that was hard to describe but immediately able to be understood in person. Eccentric, warm, and proud of the grittiness of their city, not unlike us Memphians in many ways. With so much change happening so fast, Tangier is a city that I highly recommend you visit before it disappears. Leaving Morocco was not easy, but the allure of mass transit and wine made it a little easier. Following along the vibe of blended cultures, Porto, Portugal was our next stop. The town that gave the country and port wine its name is the second largest after Lisbon. The old town is built on the hills of the Douro River, with some still standing historic sites dating back to the 14th century. It's known for seafood, port wine, and friendly locals, but in the last few years, the creative scene has grown, with street art, boutique clothiers, and furniture stores popping up around the city. The country, recently coming out of economic decline, has created an art scene in Porto that is vibrant. Structures and spaces are being stylishly reborn into new spots for eating and drinking. We passed graffiti everywhere, on garage doors, crumbling ancient walls, empty storefront glass, and neglected stucco. By the way, Culturegeist, love that. I was originally drawn to this city by the appeal of seeing the Suelos tile in person and comparing it to the tiles I'd seen in Morocco. The Suelos describes a painted tin glazed ceramic tile, most commonly found on the interior and the exterior of a variety of buildings, and a major contributor to the Portuguese architecture. The connection and influence of Arabic tiles is apparent, with their origin based in the zelig style used in the Moroccan installations I had seen. The blue and white painted style became popular in the later half of the 17th century with the influence of a Spanish artist that had been inspired by the Delft tiles from the Netherlands. This ushered in the golden age of the Suelos, with a great demand from both internal and external sources, similar to like the Portuguese colony of Brazil. Some of the most prominent and beautiful installations of this style exist in Portugal, decorating churches, palaces, monasteries, railway stations, and homes. The narrow cobbled streets of Porto are crammed full of colorful houses, all stacked neat next to each other and on top of one another. The city sits on the hills of the river, so it is at an incline. Port wine stores, butchers, salted cod, and tinned fish were everywhere. While on the way to the market one morning, we passed a man walking a half-whole hog through the streets. The city itself is lively, with streets filled with tourists and locals. Most every local we spoke with mentioned the rivalry with their neighbor to the south, Lisbon, saying Porto had much nicer people, which we found to be true. And it reminded me of our similar feud with our neighbor to the east. And we are better. Our Suelos-clad hotel was nestled in an area full of shops and restaurants and was originally a stationery shop that opened in 1829. The interiors were reminiscent of the 19th century era building, with the amenities, employees, uniforms themed in that era as well. So I thought that was really interesting. Everything from their rooms to the outfits that their employees wear to the story that they told, it was always the same story. It was a very branded experience. The next day, we explored the Douro River Valley, a region famous for port wine and table wine. The undulating curves and terraced vineyards created a beautiful landscape and are historically hard on grapes. The emerging product that comes from this region is known for plummy fruit and spicy flavors. Port wine, which we do not have today because it's too strong, is defined as a fortified wine with the grapes mixed with a brandy or a grape spirit during the production process. The region has history. The network of vineyards supplying port trades go back centuries, with the aged barrels transported via the river. Driving through the region was a calming experience. We stopped at a small hillside town, grabbed some homemade bread from an oven that had been baking for centuries, stopped for a port at a local cafe. The locals came and chatted with us, the same openness that we'd experienced in Porto. We sipped on port wine with the vines from which the port came from right in front of us. The towns we visited were tiny and seemingly untouched from the modern amenities in the cities only 30 minutes away. And if anybody had an opportunity to try the wine, there's a Vino Verde and a red wine that we both tried, that we tried both while we were there. From Douro, we made our way south to Lisbon, the largest city in Portugal. We arrived in Lisbon via a high-speed train and immediately started exploring the city. Lisbon felt similar to Porto, a seaside town with Azuelos-themed buildings, stylish shops and restaurants, but had a more traditional feel to it. More trolley cars and more big public squares and plenty of hills. It's been said that Lisbon is a city that was made so that you can walk it, go up the hills, come down the hills, and always have a view in front of you. The paving patterns and thin buildings stacked up next to each other, the views of the sea, offered plenty of these moments. The main thoroughfare was lined with banks, office buildings, and high-end retail shops. The trees, these purple trees, left a carpet of purple blooms everywhere we walked. The outdoor cafes were crowded with people, and trolley cars barreled through the city. I had read of Lisbon's recent rebirth post-recession. Once forlorn neighborhoods markets had undergone renovations and are now the city's newest hotspots for dining and drinking. I saw a lot of art in Lisbon as well, and this was one of the pieces that was the biggest that we saw. There wasn't as much of it in Lisbon as there was in Porto, but it was still there. We stopped for coffee and a traditional pastry, the pastel de nata, right here, an egg custard tart that was served everywhere. That evening, we explored a seafood restaurant that had been featured on Anthony Bourdain's No Reservations and had our fill of seafood. This is a barnacle. Couldn't get any of those for you guys to try today. By this point in the trip, we were both feeling the wear and tear of travel, so we took the day to recharge and went to the beach town of Cascais, which is on the train line from Lisbon. It was a much smaller version of Lisbon with the same vibrant arts community. Our last day, we took the train the farthest we could go west to the town of Sintra. It was a rainy, cold day. We got started late, and we had been told that we could see the entire coastline from the top of the Sintra Mountains. These are some views from the Romantic era. I didn't pick up on that joke, but it's funny, yeah. Subtle. I got it. This is actually the biggest surprise of the trip for me because we didn't plan it, and we heard such great things about Sintra. When we got there, I didn't know what to expect. I hadn't researched it at all. I just, kind of followed the advice. I'd planned a lot of stuff, and this one was my free day. So I wasn't upset about the clouds. It was this is going to sound cheesy, but it was almost like a magical, ethereal moment. As soon as I got there, Robert was feeling ill, so I kind of explored the castle by myself, and these are some of the photos from it. Now you've ruined the joke that I was going to have in a minute, so just pretend like you didn't hear that. It's okay. The palace has a profusion of styles with an intentional mix of eclectic styles, including Neo-Gothic, Neo-Islamic, and Neo-Renaissance. So this is all this cast concrete, Azuelos tiles. Every view was just, I felt like I was reading an Architectural Digest magazine or a National Geographic. It was so beautiful. There was so much detail in every face. This is a portal that we walked under. This is Zeus. If you can see, he has fish for feet here, and he's sitting in a clamshell. And then this entire portal is this cast coral. Talk about budget. The courtyard where it was actually originally a monastery that the Portuguese royalty found in 1830 and totally fell in love with and expanded. So it's a mix of this old monastery and then all this new expansion work that they've done. And this was an old courtyard that all the royal rooms were sat around, and they were renovating it at the time. But it's just, these are some photos of the tile that I saw. And then this is a banister up a staircase. It's a solid brass curved banister in the style of an octopus tentacle. Again, budget. Every room that we walked through had an extreme amount of detail. So the majority of what you're seeing here are ceilings. These are ceilings that flow from one to the other, to the other, to the other. The common occurrence only being this X here. In this room right here, this is a ceiling, but this entire room had this formed plaster that was painted with 14 karat gold. These little medallions here signified whose room it was. This was a floor pattern, another ceiling pattern. This was a wall, a domed wall. It was just incredible. So I explored the castle itself for hours. Every photo that I took got better and better. It got cloudier and cloudier and cloudier. The castle itself is clad in this very saturated yellow tone here, and then a very saturated red tone that you'll see in a minute. And then it also has this Asuelos tile everywhere. So this was a similar concept to like a widow's peak. You could see all the way to the ocean, apparently. I've heard. But it's like people could walk all the way around, and I was kind of exploring this by myself and have a little bit of fear of heights. So I'm sure everybody thought I was crazy, but I kind of just stood there for about 30 minutes trying to get up the nerve to walk around. Something about it being in the clouds, it was just so beautiful. I totally fell in love with it. The gardens are, the castle is actually in about 200 acres of garden all the way around it. So it sits at the very top of the central mountain, and there is a massive amount of trails and gardens all through the palace as you walk down the garden, as you walk down from the castle. So I explored that for a while, took a couple of these photos here. It was one of the most inspiring things that I did, and the biggest surprise that I had of the whole trip. So, in closing, you're welcome. I wanted to quickly touch on the stuff that I didn't talk about and that you didn't see. The delayed flights, the running through the airports, the lost bags, the barnacles, the blisters, the illnesses, everything that happens when you travel. And anybody that's traveled knows that, it's not easy. It's a hard thing to do, but it's always, always worth it. And the experiences that you experience while you're there change you. I was given this amazing opportunity to travel the world and come back and tell you about it. I immersed myself in cultures and opened my mind to new ways of seeing things, and I'm changed for it. I learned to let go a little bit and live more in the moment and value every experience that I have in front of me. It's the wine. This trip affected the way I see things. I see color and pattern and texture different. I'm standing in before you as a different person. I have more depth of view. I have more appreciation for people and everything they go through. I have an increased opportunity to see value in everything that I touch. I hope my journey has inspired you to seek new perspective in your own life. Thank you. Oh, I forgot about this.